Hi there, welcome back to 19th century art. In this lecture, we're going to explore Impressionism, perhaps one of the most well-known of the art movements of the 19th century, and we'll especially be focused on the work of Monet, Renoir, and Morisot. There are two impulses in art at this time that lead us to Impressionism. The first we've discussed earlier was the idea that art should be more real. It should not be bound to the classical past or a romantic vision of the past, but rather something very present, something that's really happening in the here and the now. And it's also, painting should include the qualities that make painting interesting. It should show us how painting communicates. And these two impulses are what really lead us into the idea of Impressionism. To begin with, the man who's probably most well known as an Impressionist was Claude Monet. You see here in a self-portrait from 1886. Claude Monet, we should never confuse with Manet. Remember, Manet we spoke about earlier was this man who was testing the boundaries of painting and trying to challenge the Academy by creating these scandalous paintings about women staring back at you. This is not Claude Monet. He, as a young man, is working as a caricaturist, and he meets this painter, Eugene Boudin, and he's just entranced by the beauty of color that Boudin can capture in his paint. And this is a very transformative moment, and it really brings him into this idea of landscape and light and color and how to see it. Here we see an early Claude Monet. He is working toward loosening up his brushworks, trying to capture the dappled qualities of light and finding ways to capture the subjects which seem very real. These sort of middle-class holidays on the seaside, people lounging about in their wicker chairs, taking in the sights and the colors of a beautiful morning. Perhaps one of the early sensational paintings that makes a name for Monet is this painting called Lapis, which is the magpie on the gate you see there. But what's really the subject of this painting is the beautiful quality of light that he captures as it's in this morning, reflected off the snow, that glorious shadow cast by the wicker fence and the barn in the background, and this gray sky with these opalescent hues. Again, this reproduction cannot begin to show you what this magnificent painting contains. It is just a delight. It's so sensitive and it's so exquisite in its delicacy. We see this as Monet matures as an artist, this desire to capture a feeling of movement, of figures in the city and a complex landscape, but not to get bogged down with the details, to try and create the feeling of the moment, the way the light is experienced in this very brief moment. So working more quickly. Here he's painting from an apartment building. He's inside, but he's looking outside. He's really looking at what he can see from this window. And the dappled quality of the figures and the sensations of light playing across the buildings and the mist evaporating in the sky. Now, it's in 1874 at an exhibition of one of Monet's paintings entitled Impression, Sunrise, that the word Impressionism gets fixed. It's a number of critics who've come in and are absolutely aghast at the unfinished nature of these paintings. They find them ridiculous. This is no kind of way to paint. It's not even a complete idea. It just seems a sketchy, loose impression of a painting. Not at all anything that seems resolved in their minds. It's just not done. And so we have with this the dismissive and derogatory word, the Impressionists, is taken up as a mantle of defiance. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're just trying to capture the impression of things. And rather than, run from that moniker, they embrace it. Now, another very famous early Impressionist was Auguste Renoir, who, along with the other later artists we talked about, Monet and Sicily and Basile, they would join this workshop under Charles Gillier, who was a very conservative neoclassical painter. But Gillier was different. He wasn't trying to make everyone paint just like him. He was very easygoing, and he allowed them to paint however they wanted. He gave them opportunities to help in the maintenance of his studio, and as long as they helped pay for the model, he didn't charge them an additional fee for being a student. And so for that, it was a great way, an inexpensive way for them to get their painting in, get their practice in, and to have the camaraderie and occasional help from a skilled painter, which by all accounts they mostly ignored. So here we see Auguste Renoir's neoclassical figure of Diana compared to Charles Gillier. We can see he's really looking at the model as a person. He's not idealizing the figure, which was very common at the time. And he's really trying to get at certain qualities of the body in space. Here we can see an even more painterly treatment by a later Renoir. And there you really begin to see he's into this dappled light, this loose brushwork, giving the painting a feeling of movement, giving the painting a feeling of gesture without overworking things. Perhaps my favorite and best Auguste Renoir dance at the Moulin des Galettes in 1876, we really see what makes a wonderful Renoir painting. The figures in a crowd, bustling, dancing, moving, the dappled light across the surface of the scene, and this huge complex scene that seems to allow the paint to just enjoy every surface in front of us. It's an absolute celebration of joy and frolicking good fun. That is what makes Renoir's paintings such a delight to look at. What he began doing was he would take out into public. He would actually be doing sketches, but then he would do a practice test, a kind of painting in miniature that he could do on location very quickly, laying in the ideas. He would catch glimpses of various figures doing certain things, and he would kind of fill out his composition. So there's some haphazard and a little chaotic about his work, but it works. We get the feeling that this is really happening, that this is not staged, that these are people just going about their leisure activities. And that's sort of the fun of it all. And you see how he takes those ideas he caught in the moment and then really translates them into this softer, more delicate treatment in the finished painting. The colors are more finely realized, but still there's a haziness and a delicacy that he brings to his paint. There's another famous painting by Auguste Renoir, The Boating Party, and we can see these artists and their models and their friends carousing and hanging out in the afternoon. Lots of liquor and food, and there's a casualness about this. This is not your working class people, nor is this your middle class elite or upper class people. This is really the kind of people who Renoir was hanging out with. Here, another lovely painting by Renoir is two figures dancing. Wonderful movement, dress, the twist of the body, dappled light. The background falls back in a lovely way, and we see the figure moving through this very shallow space. We're pressed up against them, this incredible intimacy that we capture in this painting. Going back to Monet, he definitely got a dose of Japanisme. You see that very clearly in his painting of his wife from 1875 in a kimono with Japanese fans all akimbo in the back. And that's part of his entry into this flatter, more graphic way of representing space. He's really not trying to create a complete scene. He's going to let this picture just rest on the surface and let the painting dance across that surface in the light that he sees, the blues and the greens and these luminous yellows that are coming off this picture. This is an absolutely amazing picture of Madame Monet and her son from 1875. Unfortunately, she does not live much longer than this. And here we see a painting by Monet of his wife's on her deathbed from 1879. And he realizes at this moment that there's something really obsessive about him. I one day found myself looking at my beloved wife's dead face and just systematically noting the colors according to an automatic reflex. He is so ingrained and obsessed about colors and color relationships that even in this fraught emotional moment for him, he still can't help but look at it as a painter. Monet was enormously prolific and he lived a long life, and he did lots and lots of paintings in a series. And I could show you haystacks, I could show you coastlines, poplars lined in the countryside, but I've chosen just one of the many, many series that he did during his lifetime. This is Rouen Cathedral. It's very famous. He rented an apartment across from the cathedral, and every day he had this huge stack of paintings. Depending on the time of day, the light of day, and the qualities of the weather, he would pull out a painting and begin to work. And over time, he would notice that the light had changed, the qualities were different, and he would pick up a new canvas and resume his work. And he'd continue to work until the day changed just enough that he needed to start yet another canvas. And this went on and on throughout the day for weeks and months. He continued to paint the exact same scene from the same view, but just changing his perception of the light before him. And this is really what was driving him, his obsession, this way of looking at form not as a physical thing, but merely the surface play of light. And on he painted these scenes. So, Monet was not a hugely successful painter. He really struggled throughout his life to find an audience. People just didn't get it. Like I said, they made fun of this Impressionism. They just saw this as an unfinished painting. It wasn't until he inherits his family estate he's able to settle down and build himself this lovely garden in Giverny. Absolutely adorable property. I highly recommend if you are ever in France to make a visit. It's not far out of Paris, but he has this beautiful water lilies that became so important in the latter part of his life, and this wonderful Japanese-esque bridge that he put across it. All of these are things that play deeply and powerfully in his work at the latter half of his life. So he undertakes these absolutely massive paintings of water lilies, larger and larger and more suggestive and looser brush marks. And this is what really captures him, is this way in which the flickering of light across the surface of water and punctuated by these brilliant colors from the water lilies. This particular example you can see at the St. Louis Art Museum. But to really get the full impact of Monet's water lilies, you need to take a pilgrimage to Paris. And there in the Musée de l'Orangerie, there is a whole building dedicated to these absolutely massive paintings he did at the end of his life. The largest of these paintings is 56 feet long. Okay, they're just enormous. And they have this wonderful curvature to them. So as you are standing before them, you become enveloped in the view of this exquisite dappled light that he was such a master of at this time. People have called this the Sistine Chapel of Impressionism. And it was at this time where he begins to see some success in his life's work. His dedication to the Impressionist vision that he began so many years ago starts to pay off. Perhaps one of the most important painters of the Impressionist movement is perhaps not one whose name immediately comes to mind when you think of Impressionism. But Berthe Morisot was one of the most respected and one of the most successful painters among the Impressionists when they were getting started. Berthe Morisot was a good friend of Manet, as we mentioned earlier, and she would marry Manet's brother, Eugene, and she had her first appearance in the Salon de Paris at the age of 23 in 1864, with the acceptance of 2 of her landscape paintings. She and her sister had studied with a pupil of Delacroix and Joseph Benoit Guichard. So she had some real street cred as an artist even before Impressionism. But what Impressionism unlocks in her is it allows her to really look at her actual life. Instead of trying to become something like a salon artist, she comes to look at the lives of women in her lives. Women were largely forbidden from painting models, and if they went out into the world, they had to be chaperoned. These kinds of restrictions really circumscribed what a woman could do, especially a woman like Morisot, who was of an upper class, who had a reputation and inheritance, and she had to be very careful. So she really works in interior spaces, and she brings them this delicacy, this wonderful vision of the moment, the thing that Manet was so good at realizing, the real and the specific and the gestures and the actions. But she does it with this looseness, with this fresh way of allowing us to be in the scene and not fixate on details, but really capture the gesture and the qualities of light in the moment. Many of her paintings are very sketchy, loose and gestural to a degree that few other Impressionists were doing, and she really pushes in this direction. Her observations of color, the interactions of color are absolutely stunning. That blue of that ocean and the way it plays against the curtains and the sky and this woman and the child. Again, we're in an interior space. We're looking at things that women look at. And this is a really important part of what Morisot brings to Impressionism. Here is an absolutely lovely picture. Again, we are allowed in to see this woman in a ball gown, and she's looking a little distracted. But it's this wonderful delicacy to the way her dress is rendered. But her face is just perfection. And the wild gestural qualities, which she captures the background, the floral things, makes everything seem so rich and vibrant and alive. Her critical reception was heavily gendered, as we see here from the critic Charles Ephrussi from the 5th Impressionist Exhibition, 1880. He writes, Berthe Morisot is very French in her distinction, elegance, gaiety, nonchalance. She loves painting that is joyous and lively. She grinds flower petals into her palette in order to spread them later on her canvas with airy, witty touches that thrown down a little haphazardly. These harmonize, blend, and finish by producing something vital, fine, and charming. This gendered way in which he belittles her work by giving it all these sort of feminine delicacies and diminishing how really original what she's doing actually is. Impressionism was gendered female, and it was people like Morisot who really, embraced that, just like they embraced the former insult of being an impressionist. They embraced the idea that, yeah, this is women's painting. This is what we do. This is how we express ourselves. And they own this in a way to give themselves not only an audience, but a legitimacy that they had not been given before. Now, this is an absolutely lovely painting, Berthe Morisot's Lady at her Toilet. This is just a scene in her bedroom. Again, she's taking down her hair. There's a kind of intimacy, a kind of moment that women understand. And it's this which makes Morisot so wonderful to see at. And you can go see this painting at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's one of the best Impressionist paintings there. Just revel in the delicacy of her brushwork. It's truly a stunning work of art. As I said, Berthe Morisot embraced this idea of Impressionism was women's painting, and many other artists, many other women artists from around Europe and the United States came together under this banner of Impressionism. They found legitimacy in it. It gave them a way to demonstrate their abilities within the rubric of Impressionism. Mary Cassatt will talk about more in the future, but I want you to know who these women were. Cecilia Beau, Eva Gonzalez, Marie Bracquemond, Lila Cabot-Perry, another American. They all worked in Impressionism, all worked like Berthe Morisot within the subjects that they were allowed and had access to because of the limitations that were imposed upon their gender.